Well, we are back in the Word today, continuing to go through this very detailed section of Ezekiel where he's describing the coming temple. We're in chapter 41 today, and again, it continues this painstaking, detailed description of this coming millennial temple. Don't forget, as we go through this, I mentioned before, it's okay to skim through this. It's all right to just focus on getting the big picture here. What the big picture is really as well is that God is giving us the details of this prophecy because he is going to fulfill it in detail. God will make sure that, as Jesus said, every jot and tittle is fulfilled in this, and that we will be witnessing the fulfillment of this down to the details that are described here, which will reveal to us God's incredible faithfulness that has extended from eternity to eternity. Also wanted to tell you, I came across a website that actually has a 3D rendering of what's described in this chapter and gives you a fly through the temple. So it'll take you through there verse by verse, describing or showing you, not describing, but showing you what's being described here. I'll put the link in the notes below in the YouTube video. You can find it at bibliaprints.com. That's bibliaprints.com. Or, as I said, the link is below in the show notes here. Here's our outline for today. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 41 describe the most holy place. And then verses 3 and 4 1 and 2 describe the holy place. 3 and 4 describe the most holy place. Then beginning in verse 5 through 11, we see a description of some side chambers that are on either side of the temple proper, and then an auxiliary building that is on the north side of the temple. And then we come back in verses 15 through 26 to see some of the decorative details, the interior details of the temple. So let's dive in, verses 1 and 2 here, the holy place. We left Ezekiel in the end of chapter 40 on the porch. Now he is moving in from the porch, and he is shown the nave or the entryway. The Hebrew word that's translated nave in my Bible, the NASB, means palace. So essentially Ezekiel is placed at the very entry point of God's palace. Verses 3 and 4, then we move from the entryway, the holy place, into the most holy place. This is the angel goes in here. Ezekiel does not, interestingly enough. We know under the Mosaic covenant that only the high priest went in, and only once a year. So perhaps that's continuing during the millennium. He is giving us the dimensions of this. Interestingly enough, it's the same dimensions that we see in Solomon's temple, but also not quite a bit larger than what was in the tabernacle. So we're reminded that the tabernacle was really just a temporary abode in the desert. Solomon's temple, the holy place, was where God dwelt. And in this holy place of the same size, God's glory, his presence, will dwell yet again. We'll see that in chapter 43. Move to verse 5 then in your reading as you move through here today. We see these side chambers that are described. And the side chambers are basically on either side of the temple. They're 3 stories tall. And as the rooms, 3 stories, there's 30 rooms on each story. And as you go from the first to the second story, the rooms get 1 cubit wider on the second story. And then in the third story, they get again 1 cubit wider than the second story as you go up. We're not told exactly what they're for here, but they're probably used to store equipment, perhaps tithes or offerings that are going to be used during the temple service. So we're not told exactly what they're for, but that seems to be a reasonable speculation. There's an auxiliary building in the front of the separate areas at the side toward the west. So I think this is on the north side of the building. We're not told what it's for. We're told it's 100 cubits long, which means it's about 170 feet. So quite the large building here. I think it's also used for perhaps storage, storing tithes. Israel may be bringing tithes in during the millennial kingdom. We also know that during the eternal state, the nations will be bringing their glory, which is another way to say their wealth, into the temple and or the presence of God in the eternal state. They may be doing that as well during this period of the millennial kingdom. So that, again, that's speculation on my part. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on there, but it's described in detail from verses 12 through 14. Then we come to chapter 15, and we see, or verse 15 of chapter 41, and we see the interior details of the temple. So in verses 16 through 20, we see the windows that are in the rooms that are on either side, the paneling that covers the wall. There's carvings in the wall of cherub and palm trees. The cherub, traditionally in the Old Testament, are servants and more specifically guardians of God. So this might be a symbol of their service or their guardianship. The palm trees may be, which characterize, of course, oasis in the desert, may be talking about refreshment, renewal, or perhaps blessing of fruitfulness that God has promised his people during this period of time. In verses 21 and 22, we see really the only description of any furniture in the temple. It's a small altar. We're not told here what it's for, but in Solomon's temple, if we can learn from that, it was either the temple of the bread of presence or the altar of incense. So it could be either one of those or something altogether different, just not described to us here. And in verses 23 through 26, we see the doors described that lead from the main temple or lead from the area around the temple into the nave, through the nave and into the sanctuary, and then to the Holy of Holies. So again, if you go to that website that I linked below, you'll be able to kind of walk through the temple in 3D and see it, at least an artist's rendering of their interpretation of these verses. How do we apply this to the church today? Well, a couple ways I'd suggest. One is just in terms of teaching, that we see the details here and take assurance that God is going to fulfill this prophecy in detail. Jesus said that he is going to fulfill every prophecy down to the jot and tittle. So Jesus is showing this temple to Ezekiel, I believe, and he is going to make sure that all this comes to pass. So we can take comfort in that. We can also take comfort in the fact that we have a sovereign God who fulfills prophecy at this level of detail. So we can rest assured that all the promises of God, including the promises of our salvation and resurrection, everything he has said, every single thing he has revealed, down to the minutest detail, will be fulfilled. And it'll all come to completion when he returns. So take courage from that, take comfort from that. And tomorrow we'll look at chapter 42 and more details about chambers around the temple. God bless you, brothers and sisters.